Good morning, everybody. The Simple Handicap for Monday, September 30th. If you're watching live on YouTube and streaming this, a very good afternoon and a very good evening. And if you're listening to this in the evening of Sunday on Apple or Spotify, a very good evening to you guys as well. As always, this is the live reaction to everything we just saw on Sunday, trying to put all the games and the results into context, make sense of it, and then we're going to have a live reaction to all of the Week 5 opening point spreads and totals after we look back at everything that happened on Sunday. If you're confused about the opening, just how we do it, because this is the Monday morning episode of the podcast. So it is good to have everybody back. Looks like a good crowd already to start the live stream. These have been great the last couple of weeks, doing them on YouTube, getting to chat with everybody. I'm enjoying these a ton, and good to see so many folks here. This is the earliest that we have started one of these. Thankfully, the game's cooperated. It is 4:20 p.m. Pacific. We've got 55 minutes until the kickoff of the Bills and the Ravens, which gives us plenty of time to get ready for a big Sunday night football game that we will be looking forward to. We'll talk about that one once we get to the end of the card. Just want to say hello to everybody here. H-Train says, hope you had a good day, Adam. And Bryce Miller says, hell of a day for subs. I would say that was probably the best overall NFL week that I can remember in a long time. We had a big run at the end of last year through November and December. It was like 1 or 2 plays a week. This was 4-0-1 on the service with the push on the Chiefs. But looking back to the preview pod, just everything lined up for the most part the entire week. Did well with the Sam P video as well. Really, really good week all around. So it's great to have those, but we continue on as we look forward to the recaps and beyond. Joe says, Adam Jets homerism cost his followers a lot of money today. Rodgers is clearly cooked, body language awful. Guy wants nothing to do with that team. Would say that first part is incorrect, as the preview video was talking about how I was writing up the Denver Broncos plus the points. But we'll talk about Rodgers in a minute, because there was a very interesting press conference that I'm trying to make sense of and figure out what is going on there as well. Connor says a fraudulent win for the Bears. We'll talk about that one, of course. Good to see that one as well. We're also looking at Darius saying, can we put some respect on Washington yet, Adam? The respect for Washington has been there since the early part of the offseason, I would say. The Smiley Kaufman PGA preview podcast was really hyping up the offense. But I will say, Darius, 3 good games, 3 very, 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 very favorable opponents that they have faced. So that kind of boosted it up. Devin Barth, hell of a day as well. Good to have you back for another live stream. Let's get going. Let's get everybody leaving your questions in the chat and start off with the recap. We'll get through these and we'll get to the live reaction. So we have all of the odds opening up on the board. Atlanta Falcons 26, New Orleans 24. A win and cover for Atlanta for members of the service, as well as on the live stream. This is a mess. We're starting off with the biggest mess of the entire week when we're trying to figure out just what in the world we are sorting through here. So the Falcons scored 26 points. They win. They cover. They don't score an offensive touchdown the entire game. So you go, okay, this is going to be a misleading box score of epic proportions. Where I have a bit of difficulty with that is I look through the box score and the Falcons are outgaining the Saints by a yard per play, yet they still needed the 58-yard field goal at the end of the game to win. Just kind of a lot to try to figure out what in the world we're getting into. So the Falcons, on the heels of a pick 6, as well as a muffed punt touchdown that they fell on in the Saints end zone, ended up building a 23-17 lead. They get the Saints down inside their 5-yard line, driving. They force a turnover on downs. The Falcons cannot convert. They give the ball back to the Saints, who drive down inside the 5-yard line again. At this point, we're at the 2-minute warning. The Falcons have 2 timeouts. The Saints are on the 1-yard line. Derek Carr goes to sneak the football to get into the end zone. The Falcons stop him. I'm watching that play unfold, and I'm like, if you're the Falcons, you got the QB sneaking, you got to let him score. The Saints kind of figured it out at that point, and the next sneak from Carr was kind of like the shoulder turn into the left guard that wasn't supposed to go anywhere. They get held up. They force Atlanta to burn their timeouts. The Saints end up scoring on 3rd down, leaving the Falcons with less than a minute to drive down and get the field goal. So it is a blunder on the heels of Raheem Morris and the Falcons in that case a little bit. But then they get a pass interference call from the Saints that set up the Falcons just across midfield near the 40. And they have 3 downs to work with, about 30 seconds on the play clock. Kirk Cousins attempted not one, not two, but 3 passes deep inside the Saints' 6 to 7 yard line, as well as the end zone, trying to go for it all. At that point, the score is Saints 24, Falcons 23. The Falcons are trying to score a touchdown from the 40. Makes no sense. They settle for the long field goal and they get it. They win the game 26-24. A mess to kind of unpack and unravel. When I look back at some of the more intricate details of the box score, the Saints out first down the Falcons 25-14, held the ball for 10 minutes more. I have a really hard time trying to sort of decipher what's real and what is not in this game. A really weird one to start us off on the recap that probably needs another look back and another rewatch, whether it's the full game, condensed game. I don't know. I have a hard time coming away from this game with a stance on either team. With that said, a couple key injuries. We'll recap all the injuries at the end. Troy Anderson, the Falcons' leading tackler, had 17 tackles against the Saints, was a huge part of the game plan. He went down later in the fourth quarter. That could be a huge loss in the middle. And then Taysom Hill for the Saints was a big part of the game plan. He ends up getting hurt as well. So 2 injuries to watch there for kind of role players on either side of the football. That was a weird game to watch and a weird game to see unfold and try and make sense of in the box score. Indianapolis 27, Pittsburgh 24. By the way, we've got the banners correct. Last week I went by rotation, and so the scoreline was away and home, and we went top to bottom rotation, which is something that everybody requested. And then there were some call-outs to say, like, what are we doing here? The losing team is on the left, the winning team is on the right. It's all mixed up. So we go through games by rotation. This week I flipped the banners, so it is the higher scoring winning team on the left, the lower scoring losing team on the right, but that is not to confuse home or away or take the teams out of rotations. That's just what we're looking at here. So another game that was, I think, not quite indicative of what the final score reflected. And I watched the Colts get out to a 17-0 lead, and then they just hung on for dear life for the next 3 quarters plus. So before the Richardson injury, he got them down on the second drive to the 5, but it was a 70-yard and an 86-yard touchdown drive where the Colts were finding explosive plays, something they're doing every single week. Doing it against the Steelers defense was impressive. Richardson gets hurt as the Colts go inside the 10. Flacco completes the pass. The Colts go up 14-0. They add a field goal. It is 17-0. The Steelers had a bit of a weird drive in that first half where they had a 91-yard drive. I still don't understand how Pickens inside the Colts 5-yard line fumbled the ball going out of bounds, had the ball spin up off of his arm, land inbounds, kick inbounds, and have the Colts recover it. Now, we had the over in this game as a release. I was on the Colts, and I was kind of conflicted watching that, but it was just a weird kind of break that went the way of Indy and took at least 3, likely 7 points off the board for the Pittsburgh Steelers. You get into the second half, and Fields has a fumble early on. That leads to an Indy field goal. And then the teams just opened the game up and it went back and forth. So it was a dead over early in the game, completely died out. And then it took until about the mid-third quarter for things to rebound and try really play to what the box score was suggesting and really realize that this was a true over. And the Colts just remain a dead over team. But with the Colts having so many defensive injuries, I'm sitting there having the Colts bet on my side, and I'm watching this game unfold. I really feel like in watching that game live that the Colts got pretty fortunate to get out of that game with a win because they had no answer for the Steelers late in the game. And even when the Steelers were driving down 3 on the final drive of the game, they were around the Steelers 45, and it was an errant snap that went off Fields' helmet that kicked them back about 13 yards. They faced like a 2nd and 23. The Colts were playing so passive on defense. And like, we know it's a predictable defense, but I really think that you get another drive or 2 in that game and the Colts are not coming away with a win. Hanging on for dear life is no overstatement at all. That's kind of exactly what happened. But it was finally the Colts overplay for the first 4 weeks of the season being realized. The teams combined for 760 yards, 45 first downs, 50% on third downs collectively, and 9 combined red zone trips. And so what we saw from the Steelers defense early against the Chargers when Herbert was in is what we saw here against the Colts, and both teams moved the football very easily. Houston 24, Jacksonville 20. This was a game I did not spend a whole lot of time watching. And so it's a recap game for me that I'm going to be looking at tonight and tomorrow. The outtake from the box score here is the Texans outgained the Jags by 120 yards, a yard per play, 3.4 yards per pass, but still they needed the late drive in the fourth quarter to get the win. They scored with about 15 seconds left in the fourth quarter on a CJ Stroud pass. That was a result that was very interesting based on how the game was being bet. A lot of Houston money early. Jags money came late. And then at the last minute, there was a bit of Texans money to push the number back up. CJ Stroud had a very good game, 345 yards. The Texans put up 435 yards. And just my box score takeaway here is that the Jags defense now for the second time this season has played a ton of man coverage. They played man coverage every game, but a ton of man coverage against an explosive opponent, given up more than 400 yards of offense, but the scoreboard hasn't made it look that bad. So the Bills embarrassed them on Monday Night Football. But I think back to week 1, and then this week against the Texans, against the Dolphins, they conceded more than 400 yards of offense. Today against Houston, they conceded more than 400 yards of offense, but it was 24 points both times. Typically 400 yards of offense conceded, resulting in more than 24 points scored. So this Jags defense, which is really struggling, is probably worse than a lot of their numbers indicate. And I look on the offensive side of the football, and there's just not a lot there. Lawrence finishes 7.3% below expectation for the day. He averaged 12 intended air yards per pass. Everything was being thrown deep down the field. There was a press conference afterward. Doug Peterson was asked about his job. He downplayed it. He was asked about Press Taylor's play calling. He praised it. Neither of those really make sense at this point. So I don't know where Jacksonville goes from here. On one hand, it was good to see them fighting after falling to 0-3 and effectively having their season over after an embarrassing game against Buffalo. But on the other hand, now 0-4 with an owner who's not afraid of making moves and everybody seemingly on the hot seat from the coaching staff with a defense that continues to struggle in the same scheme every week. I don't know where they go from here. So an interesting team to continue to monitor, but they were enticing enough at this number to draw some money this week on Thursday and Friday. Minnesota 31, Green Bay 29. 54 rushing attempts 2 weeks ago for the Packers. 54 passing attempts today for Green Bay. My, what a difference 2 weeks makes when you look at the switch. One of the things that I was quite incorrect on was the Packers' defensive ability lining up in this game. I was shocked to see Jair Alexander ruled out late at the inactive window this morning at 8:30 a.m. Pacific. I think that matters. We saw him chirping a lot throughout the week. We saw the buildup from that, and to see him ruled out caught me by a bit of surprise. And so that certainly did not help, but neither did some of the Packers' mistakes early. The Vikings get out to a 28-0 lead midway through the second quarter. They scored touchdowns on 4 of their first 5 drives, but in that time frame, Green Bay made it pretty easy for them. The Packers missed 2 field goals, and Jordan Love threw 2 interceptions. Despite leading 28-0, the Packers defense conceded just 172 yards. Minnesota scored on a 46 and a 4-yard touchdown drive in the first half. From the 6-minute mark in the second quarter until the 6-minute mark in the fourth quarter, Minnesota did not score, and they had just 8 plays across midfield on the Green Bay side. And so it was kind of a tale of the opening, give or take 21 to 22 minutes, where everything was going against the Packers, and then we saw Green Bay mount a comeback, and then it was just too many Packers mistakes for them to overcome in what turned out to be a 2-point loss. You look at how many times Green Bay shoots themselves in the foot. They missed a 4th and 8 at the Minnesota 32. They missed a longer 4th down in the first half. I'm not putting that on this side of the ledger. They fumbled near midfield. Love threw a pick in the Minnesota end zone when they were trailing by 9. The Packers in total put up 465 yards of offense, 6.3 yards per play, and went 4 or 5 in the red zone. Where I have trouble kind of grading this It's like, how do you effectively put a garbage time filter on this? Because this game was out of hand effectively after 5 drives. How much credit do you give the Packers for coming back between the midpoint of the second quarter and the midpoint of the fourth quarter? Do you consider that garbage time and the Vikings playing off? Or do you consider that Packers offensive success? I'm not a college football guy. Wife was out of town for the weekend, went to a friend's birthday in Seattle. I'm on the couch all Saturday and I'm watching Georgia, Alabama. Kind of a similar scenario where it's like, do you give that comeback credit to the team coming back because they were able to do it against a good opponent? Or do you devalue it because the lead was so big that it changes defensive tendencies of the team leading? I think that that's a tricky thing to navigate. Sam Darnold, very impressive. Again, 6.7% above expectation. Crazy number, 67% passing success rate. That is 99th percentile. Minnesota had a 73% early down pass success rate. Like, those are ridiculous numbers. The loss of Alexander was massive, but the Vikings look just fantastic through 4 weeks as they go to 4-0 and take the lead in that division as they go to London to take on the New York Jets. Next game up is Cincinnati 34, Carolina 24. Now, box score wise, Bengals outgained Carolina by 0.6 yards per play and 2.1 yards per pass. The Bengals perfect in the red zone. It is the second consecutive game for Burrow at plus 0.3 EPA per play or better. Those are 80th percentile numbers. Another great offensive performance as everybody on the Bengals starts to figure out their role, get to 100%. It was great to see T. Higgins get more involved for the sake of this Bengals offense. We saw Eric All out-snap and outplay Mike Gesicki. The Cincinnati Bengals get out to a 28-14 lead in the late third quarter. That came after the Panthers tried a fake punt and didn't get it. Very comfortable spot and lead for Cincinnati. But as you start to look at this a little bit, as I mentioned, there was the fake punt that was not converted. The Carolina Panthers got down to the Cincinnati 2 to open the game with a 1st and goal. 4 consecutive plays. They could not get into the end zone. Dalton also threw an interception that set up a 16-yard touchdown drive for Cincinnati. So it was a couple different mistakes for Carolina that set up the Bengals in pretty good spots and scenarios that they took advantage of. And I start to wonder if perhaps the scoreline is downgrading Carolina a touch more than they needed to be. I thought the Carolina Panthers and Andy Dalton looked good and progressed another week further, but it was hard not to notice some of the injuries, whether it was the absence of Adam Thielen. They had some issues on the offensive line, and then the defensive line was down. Their nose tackle had some guys banged up as well. So Cincinnati was finally able to find the ground game. So it's good for Cincinnati on offense. The negative, I think, on either side that I would take away from this game is something we've talked about a lot here on the podcast, as well as the recap shows. This Bengals defense is a big problem. And if Trey Hendrickson, who was lost in this game, happens to miss any time, the outlook for this team is pretty grim on the defensive side of the football. Up front, they've had nothing all season whatsoever. And I'm watching this Panthers offense, which has struggled to run the football for the entirety of the season, and they put up 155 yards on the ground for 5.3 per carry. That's pretty damning for Cincinnati going forward. Now, this offense is going to have to outscore the defense, and they certainly can. It's just a very different Bengals team than what we're used to so far through 4 games, and I wonder what they're going to have to do to fix that. The Panthers tackling, it is a negative. They missed a ton of tackles, made a ton of mistakes, but that's something that's pretty well known and kind of priced into who they are as a team as well as their totals. Chicago 24, LA Rams 18. So it was the comment to start the show. Disrespecting the Chicago Bears win. What do we think of it? What are we getting to with this? The Rams outgained Chicago by 60 yards, 0.7 per play, 1.2 per pass, and were even per rush. Rams finished plus 40 in net yardage for penalties. They get out to a 6-0 lead early in the first quarter. 2 red zone drives failed to get into touchdowns. You have the Stafford sack fumble, which sets up a 16-yard touchdown drive for the Bears. LA misses a field goal, and the Bears score before half. So what could have been 14-0 for LA turns into 10-6 Bears at the break. Chicago finally found a little bit of offense, I thought, to start the second half. Williams led 12 plays, 74-yard touchdown drives, and then a 5-play, 70-yard touchdown drive. That extended the lead and got it out to 24-15 with a Rams touchdown in between. Williams threw for a 56% passing success rate, which was his best mark of the season. Rams pulled within 6, but on their final 2 possessions, put up just 8 combined yards. Interesting couple of questions to take away from this game. I think the first was what was going on with DJ Moore. There was a shot of him before halftime. He was apparently sitting by himself away from the team in between every possession. He went in separately to the locker room to not be with the team. There was a video that was posted by Warren Sharp that was accusing him or DJ Moore, DJ Moore or Caleb Williams of running the wrong route. The way that I interpreted the video was it was kind of piling on Caleb Williams for missing a throw. What we know post-game was both Williams and Moore played that down, saying that it was on Moore and it was not a bad Williams throw. The announcers in the game also covered that. So I think that video that circulated around was a little bit overblown. But what was interesting is there was clearly a bit of a rift that's existed now for a couple games, but it was kind of boiling over into halftime. And then Moore ends up getting the touchdown in the third quarter, and it was like everything was righted. And so I can't tell if this is a story or not going forward, and it's something that I don't really know how to evaluate. What I could say from the Bears side is, based on reading from folks who were at the game as well as seeing some of the box scores, there was commentary about how the offense looked as good as it has the entire season. The numbers this week were not as good as the numbers last week, but the fact that they were able to find the ground game through Swift and through Johnson. Swift had 92 rush yards, 72 receiving yards. He was the focal point of the offense. But the fact that they were able to run it a little bit, I thought was a good thing for the Bears, but also a reflection of this Rams defense, which continues to struggle. And for the second week in a row, got called out by Sean McVay in the postgame presser. So kind of a back and forth here. I don't know if it reads as faulty of a win as the box score suggests. I get numbers wise how we get to that, but watching it, I didn't quite feel that. I felt it in the first quarter, not so much as the game went on. Like, unlike the Colts, who got away with the 3-point win and had everything early and then hung on, I felt like this was flipped. Like, the Bears got some luck early, and as the game progressed, they were more and more in control. That was my personal takeaway from it. I agree with you that the box score kind of upside down when you look at it relative to the score line, but I don't know if it reads as true as it is. Connor says the Bears are very poorly coached. I can't disagree with that one at all. Now, if we want to talk about, hey, perfect segue, Connor. You want to talk about a poorly coached team. The Denver Broncos beat the very poorly coached New York Jets 10-9. Now, this is just a death blow. That's an over-exaggeration. This is a stern kick to the shins with a steel toe boot delivered to the New York Jets, courtesy of the Denver Broncos, because this is the window where the Jets had to stack up wins. And to go out and lose this game where you hold Bo Nix to 60 yards passing on 2.4 yards per pass and 12 of 25 overall, which is the fewest passing yards for a winning quarterback who's attempted at least 20 passes since 2007, to lose that game at home is just an absolute killer in this window of the schedule. Cortland Sutton had 60 receiving yards. Everybody else on the Broncos combined for 0. I mean, this is an insane box score to look through, and it is an unacceptable loss for the New York Jets. But this is what happens when you play the style of offense and style of game that the Jets have. It's what we've been talking about. When you're operating at this pace and you have very specific weapons, if things don't work, this is a major problem. And that is exactly what we've seen. Not only did things not work to the extent of Breece Hall doing effectively nothing on the ground game, the O-line providing very little protection. Not only does that not work, but then you have the Jets called for 15 penalties in the game. And now you have Robert Saleh and Aaron Rodgers taking shots back and forth at each other because of the cadence switch that is needed. And so you have Rodgers wanting to keep the cadence and the pace at this deliberate tempo. We have Robert Saleh kind of pointing the finger at him, which is another thing that I just completely don't agree with. And so you have, when it goes right, something that's great here. And then there's such a fine line and margin for error that when it doesn't work, my goodness. Now, the Broncos defense looks great. And even without Singleton in the middle, who was the captain of the defense, everybody stepped up. They sacked Rodgers 5 times, constantly had him under pressure. The Jets had a 1st and goal on the Denver 1 early in the game. For whatever reason, the Jets did not bring in Allen, the power back they drafted for this spot. And the Broncos end up with the goal line stand, which was enormous in a game where points were at an absolute premium. And so it's very disappointing for the Jets to lose in this manner. But like it's a Jets team that just can't be at that high price point in these games with super short totals because there's so little margin for error. So we'll have to see how they bounce back, because next week we'll talk about something interesting matchup-wise as they go to London to take on the Minnesota Vikings when we get to the look-ahead part of this game. So a big win for the Denver Broncos, a killer for the New York Jets. Tampa Bay 33, Philadelphia 16. This was a good one. Side and teaser. Never in doubt. The Eagles did not have a first down until midway through the second quarter. Now, when you look at the box score, it's completely one-sided. The Buccaneers outgained the Eagles 445 to 227, 2.0 yards per play better, 6.8 to 3.2 yards per pass. This was a beatdown from the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I'm not going to go too deep into this game. When you look at this, the question really becomes, like, can you really knock Philadelphia for anything here? Because you're without wide receiver 1 and 2. You're without your best offensive lineman. It was a spot where, I mean, we knew that this was going to be a tough one with the bye upcoming. I don't want to call it a throwaway for the Eagles. That's effectively what it turned into. Good on the Buccaneers for capitalizing, but this is an Eagles offense in this game that is not reflective at all of what we have seen to date, nor will we see going forward when they come out of the bye in week 6. It was just a version of the team we're not going to see. I talk about teams in ranges a lot when it comes to power ratings. Over the course of a season, a team will play 10 games on average to who they are. They will overachieve in 3 to 4 games, and they will underachieve in 3 to 4 games. And I always try to find what the true value of those 10 games are. That's kind of my goal and objective with ratings and numbers that I make. This, to me, is very clearly one of the 3 to 4 underperforms for the Philadelphia Eagles that you can't view as a reflective game and performance of what the team actually is. And injuries had a big say and a big influence in that. The voice through 4 weeks. It's holding up, but we'll see. We got a long way to go, as you guys can hear it. Struggling a little bit as we go through the podcast. Afternoon games, Washington 42, Arizona 14. Not a whole lot to say here. Washington dominates the game. 449 yards of offense to 252, 6.7 yards per play to 5.0, 7.8 yards per pass to 4.4, and 5.8 per rush to 5.7. A clean sweep for Washington across the board. Arizona went 55 yards in the first drive for a touchdown. Washington answered right away. 0 problems with that. Now, the game was tight in the later portion of the second quarter. It was 17-7. Arizona had a bit of a bad break, 4th and 1. They couldn't pick it up from the Washington 35 when they were trailing by a touchdown, driving to tie late in the second quarter. They get stopped. Washington gets the long field goal. And then Washington comes out of the break, scores touchdowns on 3 of their next 4 drives, and that was it. Arizona added a fumble at the Washington 23, down 35-14. Now, the big takeaway here is pretty obvious. Washington in the offense, it's humming. They have 1 punt in the last 3 games. They're going up and down the field. Jaden Daniels' hype has reached the highest point it's been at all year. Broadcast is hyping it up. We're seeing Twitter guys all over it. Everybody's gathering around this Commanders team. We just saw them on Monday Night Football in the game everybody was watching. You get the blow-up performance here. It's another big offensive output. Has it been impressive? Yes. Is it better than expected? Yes. Are the Commanders so far the best team in the NFC East? Yes. Is there a fan base the happiest so far through 4 weeks? Yes. Possibly the Vikings, putting them 1-2. With all of that said, the Washington Commanders have played the New York Giants, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Arizona Cardinals, who collectively in roster ratings, whether you're looking at cornerbacks, safeties, linebackers, overall defenses, bottom 5 in defenses. And I could make the case that Cincinnati's ratings were actually inflated because they've been beat up by injuries and look a lot worse than expected. Arizona was expected to be a shootout team every single week because their defense cannot stop anybody. The New York Giants secondary is atrocious and is down guys. They have a good front 4, nothing else past that. Washington has had it on offense as easy as it comes the last 3 weeks. This is by far the easiest 3-game stretch of opposing defenses any team has played to date. There is no question in my mind that is propping up how good this offense looks. The other data point we have for the Washington Commanders was against a healthy Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. In that game, they did not complete a pass to a wide receiver until later into the third quarter. They had 5 attempted passes to wide receivers all game that were completed. So it's hard for me to look at what happened in week 1 against a healthy and competent defense, and then what has happened in weeks 2, 3, and 4 against cupcake layup opponent defenses, and say this is more true to what Washington is, and ignore week 1. To me, they're still closer to the team in week 1 than what we've seen the last 3 weeks. The question is, when does that hit its level? It's a bit of a falling knife game at this point, but it's becomes a question of price, which we'll get to as we look forward to their game coming up against the Cleveland Browns, which, as you can think about right now as you're watching the stream or listening to the show, a very different caliber of opposing defense that they're going to have to face. San Francisco 30, New England 13. I hope that nobody scored in this game before I came on air. I know that there was some back and forth late. Expectation was that the Niners were going to hang a big number. They did. They put up 30. The Pats offense struggles for a second week and a second game against the same system of defense. It gave them a lot of trouble against the Jets. Now they face the real thing in San Francisco. We've seen now, even with the Vikings defense against common opponents, this is becoming a real thing in the NFL where when you go back-to-back weeks against the scheme from a game planning perspective, it gives the OC or the DC a pretty big advantage. And this was another one of those spots in the schedule where it's back-to-back against the same scheme. Tough spot for New England, and it showed. 49ers, prior to the last garbage time drive, 391 to 217. Then that was with the Pats adding 60 yards on that final drive. So this was even more lopsided. 7.1 yards per play to 3.5 for the 49ers. Usually when there's a difference this big, there's arguments to make it closer. There isn't, in my opinion, for this game. This was as true of a beatdown as it looks. And I could argue that it could have been bigger. Purdy had the INT in the Pats' end zone. San Francisco failed to convert on the first 2 drives of the game with first downs inside the New England 10. They settled for field goals to take a 6-0 lead. The 49ers did have the Warner pick 6 to pad the stats a little bit. Now, what was interesting to me was as I was watching this game along with the Chiefs game in the afternoon, I felt like the Pats defense was giving Purdy some trouble and they were making life a little bit difficult. And then I look at the numbers after, and Purdy threw for 0.21 EPA per play, 70th percentile, 47% success rate, 14.2 yards, average depth of target. Massive number for Purdy in this offense against this Pats defense. And so it wasn't as bad as it seemed watching it. I just felt like it was visually maybe his worst performance that we've seen this season. People will point to Minnesota. I thought he looked better in Minnesota than given credit for, but it's hard. Like, he's been great every game this year, and he was great again this week too, despite what I had my initial impression as. So I don't know what that came from, and that was just kind of skewed, I guess, from the game. But this was very one-sided as the 49ers get out, win, and cover. Las Vegas 20, Cleveland 16. I watched very little of this game. I had it going on the third screen. I had some red zone going back and forth, seeing what was happening in this game. So I don't have a serious or significant takeaway from this game. I know that the Browns lost another offensive lineman, which is hard to believe. My takeaways from looking at the box score in this game were that the Browns were lacking explosiveness. Again, just 4.2 yards per play. The Raiders ended up coming back from the 10-0 deficit. There were comments amongst us in the chat, like we were kind of watching this Raiders performance early, wondering based on the press conference comments, no Adams, no Crosby, like is this kind of a shift? Are the Raiders checking out a little bit? Is this potentially a quick game? And to see them come back and battle back and win and cover was pretty telling against that move that happened later in the week and some of the support that the Cleveland Browns got. Something I was looking for in this game was how would the Cleveland Browns get the ground game going? It's something that they've desperately needed to do. The last couple of weeks, they've been criticized for going away from their identity. This ended up 32 passes for Watson, 22 runs for the team overall, with Watson accounting for 8 of those. I do not know how many of the 8 were scrambles, but I look at 32 passes compared to 14 running back rushes against this Raiders defense, and that just signals to me that the Browns are still trying to really play around the offensive line limitations they have with these injuries. Las Vegas has been able to get nothing going on the ground all season, and this was the first time that they found success. 29 carries for 152, not what you would expect against the Cleveland Browns. And so they went run heavy to avoid the Browns secondary and had success with it. The distribution makes some sense, but to see the Raiders, who couldn't run the ball on anyone, be able to run it on Cleveland after going down 10-0 as well was pretty surprising. So I have to watch to have a little bit more of an opinion on this one. But the Browns going through a serious identity crisis at the moment on offense, and losing Pochik at center is just another blow to an O-line, which is as injured of an O-line as I've seen in the NFL in a long time. Kansas City 17, LA Chargers 10. Chiefs get the push on the point spread, send everybody home mildly happy. I think everyone who was a subscriber and got the release, once you saw the Chargers go up 10-0, you're probably pretty happy with this. I would be on that side as well, getting away with it. In some ways, you feel kind of fortunate to catch the break, but then you look at the box score and you're like, well, maybe a guy deserved a little bit better. 5.7 yards per play to 4.2 for the Kansas City Chiefs, 7.1 per pass to 5.8, and then 3.9 per rush to 2.3. A clean sweep for the Chiefs, who outgained by 105 yards total, and then everything per play, and they out first down the Chargers for the duration of the game. Now, what stood out to me in watching this game was how once a couple adjustments were made by the Chiefs in game defensively, Chargers had nothing going. Drive number 1, 10 plays, 74 yards out of the script, looked awesome. You're like, this is a different looking Chargers team. They're doing it with a bad offensive line. Next drive, off the interception, they kicked a field goal. You're like, okay, so you have the bad break for the fumble for the Chiefs, driving after the big play to Kelsey on the first drive. Chargers go all the way back for the touchdown. You got the pick of Mahomes, you get the field goal. It's like, this is going bad in a hurry. Here are the next Chargers drives. Punt, 3 yards. Punt, 3 yards. Punt, 0 yards. Punt, minus 13 yards. Missed field goal, turnover on downs, punt, 1 yard, punt, 10 yards. And so the Chiefs' defensive line took over the game, and we saw how limited the Chargers' offense is when they're forced to compete and they're forced to catch up. There's just nothing there. You can say that the turnover on downs that they had close to the goal line for the goal line stand from the Chiefs, should they have kicked the field goal? Should they have not? An interesting decision to discuss in that game when it was 10-10, and you're at the end of the third quarter into the start of the fourth quarter. Going for it, in my opinion, certainly the right call, but there's just not a lot of explosiveness and not a lot of talent on this Chargers team. And when you have those bookends of the offensive line not out there, it's hard to sustain anything. It's the worst by far. We have seen the Chargers run game, 24 carries for 55 yards. They had nothing going at all. And then from a receiver group, you're reliant on just not a lot of explosiveness. And so Herbert finishes 16 for 27 for 169. And this kind of just, it's what the Chargers is. They're well coached. They're very physical, but there's no explosiveness here. And so really past that first drive out of the script, when the Chargers went down the field after the fumble from the Chiefs on the opening drive, they didn't really do anything the rest of the game. And it was more a matter of the Chiefs continuing to overcome circumstances and evolve on the field in real time and kind of develop into what this offense is going to be. The injury to Rice looks like it is going to be long-term. That was a bad hit. None of the reports are positive. Andy Reid at halftime said it's not looking good. That's usually a very grim outlook. And you start to wonder now, as a Chiefs offense kind of returns back to what they were last year at this time of the season, where they had no wide receivers and they were trying to figure out what they wanted to be on offense. I mean, now that you take Rice out of the equation, you're dealing with Xavier Worthy, Justin Watson, Carson Steele, Samaje Perine, Sky Moore, Juju Smith-Schuster. There's not a lot there. This is tough, but here the Chiefs go 4-0 to start the season, have had a lot of injury luck go against them, and they continue to win games, and they continue to, in this case, nearly cover the number in this spot. So this is going to be an interesting evolution of the Chiefs for a second year in a row to see if they're able to keep up and contain that. Catch up with a couple of questions before injuries. Palmer reporting that Rice feared to have suffered a torn ACL. That's what I saw from a lot of reports as well in that one, Stefano. So that looks like that is going to be a bad injury. Gerard Morris is back, joining late. Unacceptable, Gerard. Good to have you back for another live stream, though. Hopefully you catch up to the end of it before kickoff of Sunday Night Football. We have a couple questions. I think Ben's Bills smash tonight. They're legit. I don't know what Ben's Bills is, Rudy. My take on the game, my favorite touchdown prop of the season so far is Mark Andrews at plus 280. I have not looked at what the number is available yet for about the last hour or two. I'm guessing that's probably come in a bit. I think that's it was a price higher than any I could find in the database. And I mean, I did a big write-up over on bettingtalk.com. There's like 7 or 8 film guys that I watched that are just adamant that the Ravens are going to attack the spine of the Bills defense, which I completely agree with. And that sets up very well for Andrews to not only be on the field a ton, but to be a big part of the offense as well. Yes, Gerard, that was an anytime TD comment that I had. That is my look and my play in this game. And so, again, plus 280 was what I looked at. I see that it's 290s available at FanDuel. That was always the highest one that I saw on the board. I also, a pro prop bettor that I have a ton of respect for, who is as red hot as any bettor in the industry right now, played the Andrews receiving yards over. Fully agree with that one too, but I'm on the anytime touchdown for him as well. Injuries before we get to the opening odds for week number 5. I mentioned Troy Anderson for the Falcons. He's their leading tackler, had 17 tackles against the Saints. Would be a big loss for the middle of that Falcons defense. The Bengals defensive end, Trey Hendrickson, he's really been the only key contributor for the Bengals defense this whole season. He left with a neck stinger. Huge loss if he misses time. You also have to keep an eye on Rankins and Hill in the middle of that defensive line, which can't stop anybody. Cleveland, Pochik at center, another big injury to the O-line, which is decimated. Again, it's as injured of an O-line as I've seen in the NFL in a long time. Green Bay, wide receiver Christian Watson carted off. I saw the hit live. It looked ugly. I don't have any optimism that he would play this week just based on seeing it. Could be completely wrong, but that is a big loss at wide receiver for the Packers. They've got depth there, but he's obviously incredibly important. He was carted off. Have to watch for more for that. Anthony Richardson has a hip pointer. He left the game, came back for a play, had no power. It was confirmed post-game. There was a report from Wolf who said he is not expected to miss game action, but post-game, both Richardson and Steichen were non-committal. So a bit of a back and forth between those guys and how they're handling it. Reporter says he's not going to miss. Is this the coach and the QB downplaying it? We'll see. Rice for Kansas City, long-term injury. I would be shocked if it's anything but. New England lost their center and best offensive lineman, David Andrews. They also lost Kyle Duggar. I don't know if he came back in the second half. He was just promoted to captain of the defense as they have so many injuries. He was dealing with an ankle injury that kept him out. And then the Saints lost Taysom Hill, who is a big part of the offensive game plan, as well as Tyrann Mathieu who had a groin injury and did not come back. Those were the big injuries that stood out to me. If I missed anybody in the comments, let me know if I don't have anything up there. So that would say up. Jeffrey says you can say Hitman. I can't say Hitman. Tom is on an absolute heater. So hopefully heater continues tonight. Hopefully he gets his Andrews bet, and hopefully he finds the end zone as well, as I would be pretty pleased with that at plus 280. Week 5 opening odds reaction starts Thursday Night Football. Tampa Bay on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. Falcons were 3-point favorites on the look ahead. Reopen has Atlanta minus 2.5, total 43.5. No initial opinion here for me. Makes sense on the adjustment. Atlanta squeaks by in a pretty misleading game for the most part, where they don't score an offensive touchdown, score 26 points and win. Tampa Bay looks very good against a very banged up Philadelphia Eagles team on both offense and defense. Not a lot to take away from this one. I think the side and total initially look right to me. London game, first of the year. We have the Jets and Minnesota playing in Hotspur Stadium over in London. This was Jets minus 2.5 on the look ahead. The reopen is Minnesota minus 2.5 and shaded towards the 3. The total of 42 is down to 41.5. I mentioned I had an interesting note on this. So the Green Bay Packers against the Minnesota Vikings defense, the Packers really gave the Vikings defense and the blitz and the pressure problems in the second half when they went really up tempo. There was a note from a reporter post-game who did a column that I was reading that specified that the tempo was commented on internally about giving the defense a lot of trouble. Minnesota allowed 465 yards. A lot of it came from Packers drives that were pushed with that tempo. When you're running that kind of tempo, it gasses out pass rushers, it stalls out the blitz, and it really stresses speed on the back end. It's kind of the ideal formula for attacking the Vikings defense. Why I think that's important here is that the Jets have zero tempo. There's none. I mean, Rodgers runs the play clock down every single snap. I mean, they're intentionally slow. And now you have Rodgers and Salah post-game, I was going to swear, going back and forth about the cadence. So who's going to win that battle? I mean, Rodgers has won every battle. I have a hard time believing that the Jets are going to go into London and just go crazy up tempo like the Packers did to throw off the Vikings. If Rodgers has it his way, it's going to be a very slow cadence and slow tempo game, which allows the Vikings not only to time the snap late, but also play in an ideal tempo scenario. So that little quirk doesn't match up well here. Could the Jets coach around that and adjust? Of course they could. I don't know if that's going to be the case. And so that was an interesting thought to take. I don't really have an opinion on this side. I will say, like, the Jets' loss was really bad. And the Vikings certainly were dominant in that game, albeit however you want to grade and look at garbage time as a filter. We'll see. This is a pretty big move for a neutral field game. There's no home field advantage here. So to see a neutral game move this much, especially if this were to get to 3, would be pretty significant, and I think stretching the boundaries of what would make a lot of sense. Carolina on the road at the Chicago Bears. It was Bears 3.5 on the look ahead, out to 4.5. Total from 41 up to 43. The Panthers are turning into quite an over. They can't tackle. Defensively, they're soft. The defense is going to be a problem for Carolina. It's going to be one of the worst units in the league. We saw the Bears look good against the bad Rams defense. Now, you have the Bears at home again at 4.5 relative to what they closed against the Rams. Are you putting the Panthers in the same conversation rating-wise as what you're putting the Rams in? Potentially not, but then you're looking at the Bears now laying and being priced at their highest number of the season, and you're trusting an offense that has had kind of sputtering issues for 4 weeks now to cover and win by margin at home. Feels like the right adjustment to me, but almost kind of pushing it a little bit to the boundaries of what the Bears should be priced at in a game. I see a 5 at DK. That's getting pretty high for this Chicago Bears team in its current form. Baltimore, Cincy off the board. Buffalo. Houston off the board. Ravens were a 1.5 point favorite on the look ahead against Cincinnati. Buffalo was a 1 point favorite on the road against Houston. We'll see what those open later on tonight. Indianapolis on the road at the Jacksonville Jags. Hard to say if this is going to be a Joe Flacco game. If you believe the reporter, it's going to be Richardson. If you believe what the head coach and QB are saying, it's going to be Flacco. The Jags laying 2.5 minus 20. Looks like it's going to be leaning towards 3. That initially to me is the touch surprising after how Jacksonville looked. I guess you can take positives away from that game against Houston, and you can look at the Jags schedule and you can say that this Colts team is certainly a step down in competition when you think about the Colts facing the Bills and then facing today the Pittsburgh Steelers. You're dealing with a different quality of defensive opponent. They also played Houston earlier in the season. And so you're not going to get, Jacksonville played the Buffalo Bills on Monday Night Football. And so you're getting a bit of a break on the defensive side. But if you have a bit of a QB issue back and forth, if you have Flacco in this game, it's going to be a bit of an easier offense than what you faced the last couple of weeks. Don't really have an opinion on this game either, because I have a bit of a hard time understanding what's really going on with the coaching staff in Jacksonville. And it seems like that scenario is kind of boiling over a little bit. The Jags certainly 0 for 4. Only one other team in NFL history has come back and made the playoffs. Is this like the last dead spot rebound? Or is this now a Jags team that is semi-dead? I don't know how to necessarily grade through that as this number pushes out towards a field goal. Miami, New England still off of the board. We're not seeing a price on that game at the moment. Cleveland on the road at the Washington Commanders. So Washington is 3 minus 20 at Chris. We are looking at 3.5 showing at Bet Online. And I just am curious if that is, so it opened 3 minus 15 at Bet Online, got to 3.5 minus 10. We see 3.5 at DK and Heritage. Look, I get that the Browns have a long list of offensive line injuries. They can't run the football. Their identity is shaken up. This Washington defense, as bad as the Browns offense has been, to be laying points like this above a field goal at home and just assuming that this offensive success is going to roll over after playing 3 layups of defenses against the Browns defense that is still very good and is far more of a run funnel than a pass funnel like what Washington has faced. I don't buy into that at all. So if this holds at 3.5, I'm surprised. Las Vegas on the road at the Denver Broncos. This is Broncos 1.5 on the look ahead, reopening as 2-point favorites. Las Vegas wins at home against the Cleveland Browns that we just talked about. Denver wins in an ugly game on the road at the New York Jets. Neither team really getting much credit for the win. Slight tick up for the Broncos, but the reason this is ticking up is because of the Adams and Crosby injury, which could still potentially impact their availability in this game. And you just have a lowered power rating on the Las Vegas Raiders without those guys. The Broncos defense has looked great every single week this season. Progressively, they are getting better, and they get a Raiders offense that until today really struggled to move the football on the ground specifically. So this should be a pretty comfortable opponent for the Broncos defense to face in division. I would think that the Broncos take a little bit of money at this lower price point. Arizona on the road at the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers 6.5 point favorites on the look ahead. Reopen is 7.5. Total 48 up to 49.5. I look at San Francisco. They finally today had everybody in the right spot, had everybody there. Everything clicked against New England. That was a good spot for them. Arizona has offensive line issues on the right side. I would expect Trey McBride to be back for this game. He's huge to this offense. But in terms of just quality of opposing defense that you're facing, this sure seems like a spot where the 49ers are going to have some more offensive success. I don't know if I want to run in and lay 7.5, but I could certainly justify doing so relative to how the Cardinals and the Patriots were rated coming into the season, where we're at now with them. And I think Arizona is going through a couple weeks where they're being downgraded, rightfully so. And so if those O-line issues continue up front for the Cards, and there's still a limited McBride coming into this game, then I could see it. Now, the 49ers are going to be a major teaser leg in this spot at home. It should be another great game for Purdy and another good game for the 49ers offense. I don't see the Cardinals defense giving the 49ers any trouble in this spot. And so it's really a matter of what do you get from the Cardinals offense. And my initial look at this and my initial thought would be that it's a touch low. I don't know if I want to jump in and take it without knowing what you're getting, because if you're getting McBride back and you're getting some offensive line help, this offense for Arizona is going to look significantly better than what it has the last 2 weeks. So I'm kind of holding off on that. But 49ers certainly look like they're going to be wide open in teasers this week. Green Bay on the road at the LA Rams, 3.5 on the look ahead for the Packers. 3.5 is the current opening number. 44.5 the total has now gone up to 46. I wonder if we see more over money on the heels of the Packers defense struggling today in that game against Minnesota. The Rams defense continuing to struggle every single week. It's another week healthier for Love, where he'll very likely go through full practice for the first time since the injury in week 1. We've seen Rams games get bet over with some over interest the last couple of weeks, but the Rams haven't played a very efficient offensive opponent in Chicago. Last time we saw them against a decent offense was the Niners, and San Francisco went up and down the field. So if this is a spot where you get the Packers going indoors to play against LA on the fast track and the fast surface with two defenses potentially struggling, perhaps there's going to be some intrigue in the over here at 46. Giants Seattle still off of the board. Dallas Pittsburgh Sunday Night Football. It is the Steelers from 1-point dogs to 2-point favorites. Shift through 0 on the look ahead, a 3-point move, total from 42.5 down to 42. A ton of defensive injuries to watch for the Dallas Cowboys coming out of that game against the New York Giants. And so that is absolutely impacting their rating as you're trying to figure out what the status of DeMarcus Lawrence is going to be. I believe I saw that was already a longer-term injury announced. Have to wait and see Micah Parsons. You have Carson, cornerback number 1. So there are some key guys lost on the defensive side of the football for Dallas. This does seem like a pretty big move for the Pittsburgh Steelers coming out of that game against Indy, where they were definitely not deserving of that bump. And it's not like the Cowboys are coming off of an outright loss. So this is a pretty big downgrade for the Dallas Cowboys, which in this spot at this number, I would have a hard time looking at the Steelers here laying 2. And then Monday Night Football, Saints on the road at Kansas City Chiefs from 6.5 down to 4.5, currently at Chris, minus 120, total 46 down to 42.5. As mentioned, injuries to Rice, Chiefs figuring out their offense. They're 4-0. They're going through games. They're getting through it. Nah, it's another good price as I'm looking at this game. Don't necessarily agree with the full extent of the downgrade, but 5 and 6 carrying a lot of importance right now. So I see 5 at BetOnline, 5 at Pinnacle, 5.5 at FanDuel, 5.5 at DK. I will say this: we saw the D line for the Chiefs take over the game against the Chargers and shut down that offense. The Saints offensive line has serious issues up front. We saw Vic Fangio, a great defensive coordinator, throw out a great game plan with the Eagles and dominate for 4 quarters. Were the Saints unlucky in that game against the Falcons where they didn't concede a touchdown? Yes, but we know that Derek Carr in the pocket, incredibly sensitive to pressure, and I have a hard time believing if we watched Fangio a week ago shut down the Saints offense up front with his D-line, like Spags is certainly going to have an equal or better game plan to do so. And it does, to me, feel like the Chiefs defense is really taking this season at the current moment upon itself. I wonder how New Orleans is going to navigate around that if these O-line injuries continue. I think that's a pretty tough ask, but this number, for the most part, is a consensus 5 or 5.5. The one exception is Chris, 4.5 minus 20. That's still a pretty big number to lay with Kansas City, potentially with these offensive injuries that they're suffering and just how limited they are, both running and passing the football, despite Mahomes being under center. That's all the game's done in less than an hour. Kickoff is in 1 minute. That is perfect timing for everybody here. Let's hope that we want Mark Andrews in the end zone to make everybody happy. Looks like Ravens money has come in very late. Looks like there has been some over money coming in very late after 440. There was a move from 47 up to 47.5. So I think we're going to be in for very fun and very enjoyable Sunday night football. It's going to be a great game between two great teams to watch. Have a fantastic Sunday night football, everybody. Have a great Monday. We'll chat back with each and every one of you bright and early on Tuesday morning.